The language of English is an accumulation of many different languages, one of them being French. The Normans, a group of people originally from Scandinavia, started to move down to France and picked up the Frankish language. The Normans then took over the area which is now England, which caused their language to influence the language spoken in England, which resulted in Middle English. Originally, the Normans were Vikings who specialized in sacking villages. As they grew more bold, they started to sack areas far from their homeland. They would set out on week-long journeys and come back with all the plunder that they had collected. At the same time of the Vikings, England was conquered by the Grand Army. The surrounding Norsemen took advantage of this and became rich from spoils of war. In an attempt to stop the raids by powerful Vikings, King Charles offered them a large piece of land. This made the Norsemen an official state of authority. Eventually, Norsemen became Norman, and that is the name that was continued to be used. Since the Normans were given their own estate to live on, it allowed for them to establish connections with other kingdoms. They also controlled a large area of good farmland. This led to them becoming wealthier and more powerful. Eventually, they grew bold and started to conquer other lands. They set their sights on England, which led to the Norman conquest of England. The Norman conquest was not only a war to gain land, but a war of the kings. On the throne of England was Harold, and the leader of the Norsemen was William. When Harold was crowned king, William waged war in an attempt to steal the throne. After many grueling battles that were mostly in William's favor, he was able to finally capture London and defeat Harold's army. This resulted in Norman control of England. When William the Conqueror became king, he created an entirely new governmental system that was used to run England. During the war, he promised many of his loyal followers land. He also had to deal with the fact that there were many English nobles who were quite wealthy and could easily usurp his power. He fixed both problems by redistributing the land in England. He claimed 20% of the land for himself and scattered the nobles' land all over England so that there wouldn't be a high concentration of power in one place. The king still had to rely on nobles, though, which meant that the government was a feudal lord system. This feudal system proved to be quite strong and kept the country at peace for many years, and it also kept the Normans on top of the whole governmental system. Since the king spoke French, it meant that French was the language of royalty. English, which was spoken in England before the Norman conquest, was seen as a language for the poor and ignorant people. For English to survive, it had to adapt, and in a result ended up taking a great influence from French.
Before the Normans, English was considered to be Old English. When the Normans invaded England, Old English went through a transition period where it transformed into Middle English. This transformation process drastically changed English, making it closer to what we use today. Middle English is a combination of Old English and Old French. English borrowed many words from Old French. Most of the words that English borrowed can be put into various categories, such as law and government, the church, nobility, military, cooking, culture, and luxury goods. An example of a word that we borrowed is letter. In Old French, the word for letter is lettre. Over time, you can begin to see that it is easy to pronounce the r sound as the sound. Other than the slight difference in the suffix ending, the Old French and modern English words are fairly similar. Another example of a word that English borrowed from Old French is female. The word for woman in Old French is femelle, which is similar to female in our modern English today. You can see how over time the L suffix can transform into the ale suffix. Once again, except for the ending of the two words, they are almost the same word. During the time of the Norman rule, English borrowed words for certain things that they already had. This created synonyms in our language today. In general, the synonym word that was derived from French is thought of as more formal language in our society today. An example of these synonyms are commence and start. As previously mentioned, the Normans were considered to speak a more intellectual and complicated language. In the example of commence versus start, commence originated from the Old French word commencier, and start originated from the Old English word starten. In our language today, the word commence is seen as more prestigious or of higher class, whereas the word start is seen as of lesser class than the Old French word. Another example of this is in the synonyms chamber and room. Chamber comes from the Old French word chambre, In French, chambre doesn't have the same level of prestige as chamber does in English. The word room comes from the Old English word room. In our modern English today, the word chamber implies a fancy, luxurious section in a mansion, and the word room implies a regular section in a building or house. The fact that the Old French words sound of higher class is no surprise. Since the French ruled England, it is understandable that their words were considered of higher class because they were royalty. Another example of the Old French words being of higher class is in animals. In modern English, there is a different word for a living or cooked animal, such as pig and pork. Most of the words for living animals originated from Old English, and the words for the cooked animals originated from Old French. This was because the French were the people who were being served the cooked meats because they were royalty, and the Anglo-Saxons, the people who spoke English, were the ones who were tending to the livestock, the living animals. When the Normans conquered England, our history not only changed, but our modern language today.